try, fail, try, fail, try, fail, try, fail. I'd look at it, product building, company building, all of it, every step in the journey is actually a bunch of little S curves. And so you're constantly trying, you're failing, you're trying something else. And eventually you get lucky and something works. So I think it's like try, fail, and then like try, fail, and then try success or something like that, right?
Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. I'm really excited to dive in with Raj Singh today. Raj, you have had your hands in many industries. You have been a trendsetter, and you have been a 4-time exiter as a VC-backed founder. Now you are VP of Product at Mozilla, a company that we all are very familiar with. So thank you for taking some time to be on your brand amplified.
Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about your background. You've always been a player for the small to medium-sized businesses, but you have been in, calendar, recipes, browsers, ringtones. Now, one of your products at Mozilla is website design through AI. What has intrigued you or what got you into the stratosphere?
If you go to any product course, they'll tell you find a problem, run customer discovery, do user research, repeat, learn, iterate, whatnot. And I'm not in that camp. Call me contrarian. I'm in a different camp. They often will say, don't look for problems that, don't necessarily just fix it for yourself. You want to discover something. I'm on the other side of that coin. I look for problems that I personally experience and I want to fix it for myself. The reason I really love that approach is I feel so much of fixing or solving a problem is about feeling the pain. Because when you think about product, the question I like to ask is, how do you feel right now? So when you see a screen, when you see an onboarding flow, when you see a settings menu, when you see whatever, how do you feel, right? And it's not a question people ask very often. How does the user feel? Over time, you get better at simulating. But when you experience that pain yourself, when you're in the garage moving your wet clothes from the laundry machine to the dryer, it's annoying. It's painful, right? More than once in my head, I'm going, could I build some kind of contraption that could vacuum suck this clothes from one side to the other side or whatever, and of course, there's probably products that already exist. But the point being, I look for personal pain points. And so when you look at personal pain points, you're all over the place, right? You're not necessarily, and I give credit to entrepreneurs that solve something in ad tech and then do it again and do it again. And, and that's perfectly fine. And they've built great businesses and lots of success. But I very much sort of chase a pain point. It becomes a passion. I get focused on it. I try to solve it. And then I move to sort of the next thing. And as a result, I like to describe my career as much more of a map where I've kind of jumped around between different interests as opposed to a ladder, which often larger companies reward for because they do want people who've been doing a similar sort of specialist kind of role for 20 years.
Yeah. I would argue, though, that the map approach, which I think anybody who's an entrepreneur typically follows, we kind of go where our interests are and what's engaging us at any one moment and what we're interested in becoming educated about. But I would argue that I think that approach is probably what's needed in the future of work.
100%. So I have this term, I call it super IC. And I basically define it as your objective or your goal is to replace your low leverage work with AI so you can focus on high leverage things. If you look at what AI is doing, it's democratizing fractional expertise. And so I now have a new baseline on a whole set of competencies where maybe I didn't know a lot about this topic or I wasn't very good at this or whatnot. And AI is bringing that to a 50% threshold or a 75% threshold. And so now the real trick is becoming an archetype that can figure out how to use all that and be sort of high agency and get it done. And so I think what we're seeing is a gradual shift towards generalists. And generalists tend to have careers that probably more mimic map-like careers because they've typically followed different passions. They've doing a range of different activities. And as a result, I think there's a disruption coming. People talk about AI and the disruption on the workforce, but I think there's a disruption coming in just the interview process because the interview process today is so much oriented around domain expertise because it's the most quantitative thing they can look at. Like, oh, this person's been in this domain for 20 years. They must know a lot about this topic or whatnot, right? But we don't need specialists now. We need archetypes that are high agency and have good sensibility or what sometimes people call taste.
Yeah. This is going to go straight to my students at USC. I can tell you that now, because of course the programs that we work in were created before everybody started talking about generative AI. And we had to start, at least I did, slowly start weaving, talk about different AI and talking about AI and large language models and computer vision. And then over here is this generative world we live in. I'm trying to help them understand some of the bigger concepts, but then also how it applies and to their day-to-day work, whether it is as digital advertisers, marketers, if they're actually doing production for television or commercials or whatever their career path is. And it's interesting because I find a lot of them have been reluctant because, yes, they're digital natives, but they're also, this is an unknown. They've seen movies like Terminator and, RoboCop and things. And so some of them are like, oh, that's a scenario. Or some of them are coming right out of undergrad and saying, well, we couldn't use any AI tools in our undergrad. And I'm like, no, you have to use these.
Yeah, I actually term for this, I call this AI native. It's certainly going to get a new generational label, Gen Beta, basically folks born after ChatGPT era, where the expectation is you have AI in your pocket. I actually even sometimes describe this to people as this is the Neuralink. People are waiting for the Neuralink, but nobody really thought everyone thought it had to be a hardware device. I'm like, no, we had it like that has to be embedded in your body. No, it doesn't have to be a bionic. It's in your hand. It's your phone, right? This is your Neuralink. So I'm of the opinion you should use whatever you need to use and learn. But really, the trick now is, do you know how to harness all that creative energy? Do you know how to be Socratic and ask the right questions? Do you know how to go and problem solve and fix and figure this out? Do you know how to be a reviewer, an editor, a conductor versus an author, right? And these are different skills, different way of thinking, different dots you have to connect. And it's an archetype. And I think this is why you're seeing a lot of disruption in the workforce where years of experience may no longer be a signal of competency, right? Like just because you've been doing this for 15 or 20 years doesn't mean you're necessarily better than the person who's been doing this for 5 years, because archetypes is very different to sort of domain expertise. And so I think a lot of this transformation is happening now. That's why just the whole area of digital transformation, all very interesting. But these things start slow and then they go fast. Most sectors follow tech, tends to lead. And we're seeing the changes within tech happening now.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, you hear headlines that may be misleading about the MIT paper that says 95% of companies are failing at using AI and integrating AI. And I think the consumer messaging is different than, right? The big headlines sometimes are different than what we see in the industry.
Certainly AI is a term that's been around for a long time, right? Like the movies have been talking about AI since the 90s and the 80s, right? Back to the Apple Newton or whatever, right? So I think the problem is people expect AI to be perfect. They expect things to be 100%. And we had a number of companies soon after ChatGPT was released or in that era raise venture money, making pitches and stories that we're going to fully replace this workflow. We're going to build this AI that's going to perfectly schedule all your meetings. And then it gets one thing wrong. And the click penalty for getting something scheduled wrong is actually really high. Like that's a big deal. Like there are certain areas where it's not a big deal. Like, okay, help me write this essay. I can review it and edit it. If it got something wrong, that's fine. But getting a meeting wrong on my calendar, that's a big deal. It messes up my social equity. There's a lot of issues there, right? So what I think has been realized, and we knew people have been in the AI space know this. There's a threshold, and I call this the 95% rule, that you should assume AI is 95% correct, but always 5% wrong. And when you assume that it's always 5% wrong, how does that influence the user experience that you ultimately build? If you build a user experience that's sort of turnkey, one click, I'm going to automatically schedule all your meetings just based off email communication, that's not going to work, right? Because it's going to fail. It's going to be wrong 5% of the time. So what's happened is a lot of these startups that raised money, I think, against these sorts of pitches just 2-3 years ago are realizing that they now need a human in the loop. And all of a sudden, when you need a human in the loop, it changes the economics of the business. And so some use cases don't make as much sense, right? But I think what's happened is the general consumer just assumes that it's 100%, but it's not 100%. It's 95%, and it's 95% in a way that may not feel obvious to a human because it's doing things that are really hard perfectly, and it's doing things that seem so obvious to a human wrong, and you don't understand why. And that's what maybe throws humans off. It's like, oh, how did it miss that right turn in a self-driving scenario, because there was a little puddle there and it couldn't see the line or whatever, but to human, it's like so obvious, right? Who knows? And so, but I think humans are learning fast, right? We adapt, right? And we're realizing, and I think startups are changing their messaging and positioning. And I think bigger companies are recognizing how best to bring it into the user experience. So I think all of these things are converging. And so we're kind of moving past that hump.
Yeah, nice. One of the things that keeps us more human in this world and helps us have our own distinct identities is our brands and the value that we bring, whether that is AI knowledge, product knowledge, inquisitive minds, and being willing to chase down those lines of inquiry. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about the different companies that you created, products that you designed, and what rabbit holes you went down, and then how you now got to Mozilla.
Yeah. So, brand building in 2025 is insanely difficult. Like, I often tell people, ask me, like, hey, Raj, you're calling it brand. I sometimes call it growth in just different ways. So distribution, with customer acquisition, whatever you want to call it. It's like, hey, Raj, how did you drive growth, with that sort of company or whatever, right? You must be really good at growth. And I always tell them, I'm like, what worked yesterday doesn't work today, right? So it's like changing constantly. Now, this arbitrage window where you took a strategy to sort of drive growth may have been like 3 months. I'll give you a good example. In 2008, 2007, you literally built anything on the Facebook wall, any app, you got growth, right? And we saw the rise of Zynga and a number of these social apps that just effectively spam the wall. And that window was open for 1 or 2 years before Facebook started clamping it down, realizing it was adversely affecting end user experience. People were complaining, et cetera, et cetera. That's no longer a growth channel. I mean, when's the last time you saw a Facebook app push something into your feed, if you're even using it?
Yeah. No more farms on Facebook.
So the arbitrage window there was like 1, 2 years, right? Fast forward, I was a launch app with my calendar startup 2 startups ago for the Apple Watch. Within, yes, there was an advantage being one of the first 3,000 apps. You got some growth. But within a week, there was 10,000 apps, right? And then there's 20,000 apps. The window just kept sort of shrinking and shrinking. And now when people figure out a growth tactic, maybe they figure out some strategy on Google Ads, maybe they figured out some new strategy to drive a lot of, let's call it bot-driven replies on Reddit. Maybe they figured out AI SDR, like a cold email strategy, whatever. Like the growth minds and engineers and, analytics and operators and tactics and whatnot out there, they see these tactics and they're employing it within minutes, like within hours, like they're like reacting to it like, oh, we need to start making this adjustment. Here's a new way to sort of track attribution on iOS or whatever it might be, right? So, these windows have really, really shrunk. But anyways, full circle, coming to your original question, if I was to sort of high level 10,000 foot view, how I drove growth with different startups, in 2000, I had a file sharing company. Open source was a hot area. It was easy to drive growth. You're an open source app. There wasn't a lot of apps. We were doing file sharing. It's all about stealing music, for lack of a better term. It was a hot topic. Building out of college, so having a college network, huge back then, right? Very effective. 2002, 2003, I had a dating site for college students called Match Students. Spam in college forums, sites like where you could rent textbooks, other sort of college community forums. It was very popular back then, these like forums and communities, like these bulletin boards, whatnot. That was very effective. Even cold email was very effective. People used to open their spam, right? People opened every email, right? Like opened every email because email was a novel thing.
Hiding. Yeah.
Exactly, right? 2000, if we fast forward to 2009, I had a cooking app, 2010, called All the Cooks. I'm kind of jumping from different startups to, I'm not going through everything here. We realized we were early on the App Store. We realized that, and at that time, getting featured was a big deal. Like if you were featured in the App Store, you got a lot of installs. Today, it's not really worth much. So we realized the thing about cooking apps is people love to cook on holidays. So what did we do? We went and figured out what are different recipes for different holidays around the world. Then we went to the App Store. We said, hey, feature us in this country because it's a holiday there today. By doing that, we were featured every day of the year. And next thing you know, we had 30 million users, within 1 year, right? So very sort of interesting growth tactic. In a similar capacity, we launched a cooking channel on YouTube before people had cooking channels on YouTube, right? Like this was like a whole new thing, right? So that was sort of really interesting. With my calendar startup 2 startups ago, we did a reservation line. So if you think of like old school, original club in New York, they create the artificial guest list, the line. This is relatively new concept in the App Store to have a reservation line and a wait list. We did that with the calendar app, and that drove a lot of growth, drove our first few 100,000 users just through the scarcity strategy, right? So, I'm really going like super high level across these different stories. because there's so many little stories within each of these. But I think thematically, the thing that you'll find is it's a range of different tactics. It's a lot of what I call creative execution, and you have to get a little lucky, but it's only one of many channels, right? You're doing PR, you're doing content marketing, you're creating email lists. Like every person I talk to, I'd add to a newsletter. I'm not following canned spam. I just add you and I put a note at the bottom and say, hey, you're on this list because we talked about it. Now you can unsubscribe if you like, but I auto opted you in, right? But usually it's coming from me, so people don't think of it as spam. It's just like from a friend, right? Whatever. So I used every tactic I could. Today, every one of these things are being exploited, right? We're seeing levels of sloth and outreach at like astronomical levels, right? So it's a whole different game, not a process between all the signal and noise, but growth is the name of the game. And I think in this agentic world, or maybe let's say not agentic, but in this vibe coded world, where the volume of apps and creation has just like 10x again, figuring out ways to drive reach and make people brand aware is going to be the growth hack. I mean, that is the trick. And so in many ways, I even tell startups now, you have to be thinking about that on day one, well ahead than, in the past, it was things that they may not even be thinking about until after they build the product. But now, like, I care more about your distribution go to market than I do about the product itself at this point.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And when it comes to your brand, also, right? Because you have, gosh, I mean, I can't even go through all of your experience that I'm looking at on my other screen on LinkedIn as founder, co-founder, entrepreneur in residence, moving into roles once your product was acquired as, VP of product, then moving on to other things that you're interested and engaged in. How's that experience been? And what has excited you about being able to continue like having this reputation for being creative and being able to create things that people actually want to use, but also, knowing that you get to jump in and try something different every time?
Yeah, so I think there's a few comments here. So one, I wasn't always intentional about my own brand. So, coming out of college, I'm just kind of building. You don't really know, I dropped the master's doing file sharing company. You don't really know what's going, just building, right? Like, and I remember it was 2004 and I was working at Photo, which is now was part of Kodak Mobile. It was like a photo website, not mobile, but it was like a
I am old
online
enough to
photo
move
site.
that.
Yeah. Like it was a startup at the time. It was like a few hundred people. And there was a consultant on the team. And we were at a trade show, a Kodak trade show, and he didn't have the Kodak business card. He had his own business card. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And I realized he was doing all these sorts of things to brand himself through his business card. In his relationships, he would introduce himself as, I'm a consultant and this is what I do, blah, blah, blah. And he would show value by always having access to information. Like he would, it was all about knowing the right people. And this was very effective back then. This is pre-Twitter era, before everything is public, before it's public. There's a different era now, right? But at that time, knowing people and access to information was like a huge differentiator and why you would hire certain sort of consultants to come in as sort of to play these fractional expertise roles. And I was like, wow, I could learn from this. And so I started becoming more intentional. Like I spent energy to sort of say, I want to build and foster my network. And so my personal approach at the time was I was going to these wireless trade shows is I would be the person who'd put together the party list. So I'd go through my network and I would ping different people and kind of aggregate the party list. And when you're the party list organizer, you're also the person who everyone pings for who are the parties, but you're also the person eventually that people then invite you into their parties. And so I always had like people who were with me could get into all the parties, right? And so I became through that a way I was started harboring, building sort of my network. The second thing I did was I was very proactively, like meetup.com was just emerging and these sort of like lunch meet and all these different things. Then I made goals around this to sort of like, I'm going to meet new people. When LinkedIn emerged, I was deliberate about my LinkedIn, about adding contacts. As I meet people, I was starting doing that from very early. I wasn't creating a lot of content, this sort of pre-Twitter era. A lot of that emerged later, but I would definitely try to go get lunch with everybody. And, you're always in an office at the time. And so it made sense. And so these were things I was doing to sort of just build my network, right? And then I started blogging, right? So I was the mobile blogger for O'Reilly, which was the old book publisher that put animals on their books. And then later I started guest blogging. I was doing this even in college for Zero Paid, Open P2P, because I was doing file sharing. Later I did some guest posts for VentureBeat and other sorts of sites, right? Mobile Crunch, which was the tech crunch for mobile at the time. Most of these things have shut down at this point. But that was a great way to sort of get your brand out there, right? I was building a mailing list. So I would always keep track in my address book what I would do. And this is, again, pre-iPhone era. I would star people I wanted to keep up with. This is before text era. right? And then you had like your bigger list. And now with like five, now it's not even maintainable with like the whatever 10,000. I don't even know how many contacts are my phone. I mean, who opens the address book on their phone anymore? It's a nightmare, right? So these are like all sort of things I did. And, later, obviously, as being a founder, you're obviously meeting a lot of people. And I was always very sort of proactive about making introductions. People would ask for intros and I'd make them, right? VC intros, no problem. I later created a rule that I would only do up to 3 intros because I'd get so many of them. And then I later created a rule that I would do double often. I used to just directly make the intro. Now I forward along and say, do you want the intro? Just to be more respectful of the other party, just because of the volume of intros. So these were things that I made adjustments as I went on. And then, I have these mailing lists. And as I started going into different cities, I would have different lists of people I knew in different cities. So I'd reach out, and I'm in Seattle this week, or like whatever, like, hey, who's in Seattle, right? I'd send out a list. Everything was through email, right? This fell apart a little bit by the time it got to 2014, 15. It's just the volume got too crazy, right? Like, can't do this stuff anymore. The scale started becoming more active on social. That was between Twitter, mostly Twitter at the time, a little bit of LinkedIn. More recently, I've been doing like if you're looking at just the last few years, I restarted my effort to sort of attend a meetup at least once a week. So I did that for a year as a way to sort of build new network. I started doing more podcasts as a way to sort of connect with more people, started writing more content. But one thing I always tell myself is, making new network is easy. Maintaining your network is harder, right? There's so much value in my network that I've already built. If I could just focus my energy on re-engaging my network on a periodic basis. One year, I remember one thing I did was I made it a point that I was going to wish happy birthday to everybody as a way to rebuild my network. So I did it every day for the year, right? It was a lot.
Every day.
It was a little bit of work, but it was awesome. I reconnected with so many people, right? And so I think, you have to be a little bit intentional, but I've always invested in sort of really the people, like maintaining relationships. I think that's a contributor to luck, right? And you need as much luck on your side given the 86% venture-backed failure rate.
Wow. Well, those are all really great techniques. And I think particularly now, what's old is new again. Connecting with people one-to-one, even if it's over a Zoom or Riverside or what have you. But I've also found so much value in those in-person connections, or going to a conference and saying, oh, we don't have time to meet at this conference, but let's follow up. And some of the best relationships that I've had really in the past couple of weeks have been from those kind of interactions where you go through the app for the conference and you pick out like who you want to meet. And then somehow, or just even the keynote speaker, leaving a comment with them.
I go out of my way to try to grab lunch with people. For what it's worth, I have generally found that I just can't retain or build that kind of relationship over Zoom or, over Meet or whatnot. And so in my perfect world, I do try to meet people in person. I think it builds a different rapport. With return to office in the Bay Area, and Bay Area has always been a super hub, so everybody ultimately comes here at some point. They pass through or whatnot. It's been a great way to sort of connect with a lot of people. But I will say, increasingly, and if you talk to the average sort of VC, things have become more transactional. Even financing rounds might close within days. Decisions have to be made so fast, right? This is a marked shift in how business was conducted in the past. If you take the other extreme, if you used to do business in Asia, it's always been very relationship driven, right? But if you look at where things are today, we're now on the other end of that spectrum. And so I think one thing that does benefit me, at least today, is I've built a lot of network over the years. I imagine for people beginning their career now, it's harder. But, I think one thing now is there's a lot more data and feedback online. And so you can be more intentional about it at the onset.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about your position today, right? You are at Mozilla. You had a company that was acquired by Mozilla.
Yes.
And now you're creating new initiatives and new products. Like, how are you deciding what you want to create next? Is this something that you're using data analysis with Mozilla's blessing? Is this something that you're kind of going back to your roots of, here's something that I want to solve, or that I hear a lot of people in my network want to solve. So I'm just going to create that and keep going down that.
I'll tell you exactly how I landed what I'm doing now. So Mozilla acquired my company. It was integrated into a product that's now shut down. So, ignore that for a second. So I was moved into a position where it's like, hey, Raj, can you build something new? And my default is always to look at personal pain points. So I was thinking a lot, this was tail of 22, early 23. And I was thinking a lot about over COVID, I wanted to build a website to teach kids how to play chess for free. Kids were stuck at home. Schools were closed in the Bay Area for a long time. And so I went to Wix or Squarespace or I don't remember. I went to a couple different ones. I probably spent 45 minutes like, wow, this is like way too complicated. Like the number of settings, the number of options, all these sorts of things, right? And I was like, I gave up. Like, I'm like, this is not going to happen. And, those products were a little bit more nascent at the time, too. I mean, they're obviously mature companies, but those products all obviously improved a lot since then. In any case, so I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, could I just build a better experience here? And then, of course, at the same time, we have ChatGPT. And I'm realizing it's really good at text, like it's really good at building copy. And so this felt like a disruptive opportunity. Could I marry generative AI with helping you build your website? And that's how Solo emerged. And Solo's obviously grown quite a bit. So Mozilla Solo at Solo.ai has grown quite a bit. And there's a lot more to it. I'm not going to go through all parts of that story. But then what happens after that is sort of interesting. So within Mozilla, most of our audience is Firefox, as you would imagine. But this is a new audience, right? This is small business, right? Solo's going after small business, solopreneurs, whatnot, right? And we just talked about this. The hardest thing in building any product or startup is distribution. It's acquisition. So of course, in my head, I'm going, well, we're acquiring small business customers with Solo. So if we're going to build more products, we should build it in the same category because we want compounding go-to-market advantage. We don't want to have to build more net new audience. Most companies, when they're building new product, they're building product to upsell to their existing customers. But that doesn't work in this case because Firefox is mostly an unauthenticated audience and it's all pure consumer. We're not an enterprise company, right? We're not Atlassian saying, hey, Jira customers, here's another thing we want to sell to you. Right. So we can't play that game. So we have to build a new audience. So naturally, I'm looking at other things that SMBs need, right? Small business needs. And so we have tons of research here because, we've been at this now for a couple of years and we've identified ranges of things that they need. So now we're building a multitude of products in that space, everything from back office accounting for small business owners to things to help drive growth between blogs and social media management, even things to be your virtual receptionist, if you're the plumber on the job and you can't pick up your phone right now. So we're looking at ranges of different use cases to help create more automation and for small business owners so they can continue to just focus on their work and not have to deal with all that other stuff.
Yeah. It's a very unique approach because I was on the Intuit Small Business Council for several years, going to DC, talking about the needs of digitization for small businesses and then AI powering Main Street and how small and medium-sized businesses really needed tools and resources to be able to scale up, having access to funding, perhaps, for investments in technology, as well as education. So now if you go into QuickBooks, you see a lot of agentic tools and, who want to be very helpful as part of their ecosystem. But what you're talking about is really taking the business first. I mean, you already said this, right? You're not an enterprise solution that's trying to sell more things. You're really looking at what are the needs of these organizations that don't have big budgets, that don't know where to start, that are probably going to waste money in an area because they don't know what to ask, they don't know what to do, and they're going to invest perhaps in other tools, resources that might not be the smartest move right now. So looking at a website designer, which by the way, I'm going to play with after we get off this interview, and then thinking about those other things that you can solve and playing in that space. Because so many times going to conferences, everybody's more concerned with enterprise solutions when small to medium-sized businesses are such a backbone of the economy. And they're the people who really, really need help.
Yeah. So this was inspired. I was looking at Yahoo Finance in 22-23. And they put up this chart and they said the fastest growing business in the US is the solopreneur. It's the freelancer. It's the side hustle. And this makes perfect sense. COVID has really driven what I like to call an ownership economy. People want to be their own boss, right? And remote work has given people the freedom to experience what it's like to be your own boss, right? Because all of a sudden now they have an integrated lifestyle, whereas previously there may have been very clean separation between sort of work time and personal time. And so you have that combination of things. And then you have the effects of sort of Gen AI on the workforce. And unfortunately, just, layoffs and whatnot, right, that are happening out there. This is, people want to pursue their passion projects. People want to make money and do what they love doing. And so for me, I think it's so aligned with Mozilla's mission around sort of let's democratize, help the underdog, and so that's what we're doing. We're building tools for that audience because we want them to succeed.
Amazing. I was also reading, because you are doing a little bit of a podcast tour, perhaps. And I was seeing from one of your previous interviews, four-time founder walked into a last-minute meeting with HR. They were waiting with printouts and severance papers. So will you share that story?
Oh, yeah. So that story was, obviously clickbait is the name of the game there.
Yeah. But it's highly effective clickbait.
But I don't mean that in a negative way. That was a great discussion. He was asking a story about, this story came up in the context of, so I've always been building stuff on the side in the past. I'm very focused on what I do right now. But, when I was younger, I was always building stuff on the side. And actually, I remember even one of my board members once said, Raj, you only get rich once. I thought that was a very interesting quote because I didn't understand it at the time, but I understood it like a year later. What he really meant was focus. I'm much better about that now. But, in my 20s, I was just doing a lot of different things. And I was working at Photo Kodak Mobile, and I built this ringtone product on the side that was doing quite well. Like it was distributing in Walmart, Best Buy, CompuSaid. At that time you sold software on the shelf, not online. And we added a feature in there so you could upload an image on your desktop and then send it to your phone. And getting ringtones and wallpapers on your phones back then was difficult. It wasn't like iPhone era, right? Every phone was different. There's different formats, different resolutions, different, color depths, whatever. You had to do a lot of testing. And so Kodak Photo, I don't really know the entire backstory, but I think people got wind that it was like quite successful. And I was doing it very much on the side. Like it was not like affecting my day job. I thought I was doing a great job in the day job and sort of executed a lot of stuff for them, but it was at night and on the weekends and whatnot. I don't know the full backstory, but I think somebody was getting a little bit jealous about what was going on there. I mean, these things happen, and reported to HR. And so I'm in the office and HR pings me in an email like, hey, can you come to HR at blah, 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 right? Now, everyone worked at the office at the time. And it's scary, right? I was like 23 years old. I graduated when I was like 2021. I graduated in 3 years, so I was young. I was like 24 years old, and everyone's in the office. So I'm walking to this part of the office I'd never been to, right? Like the HR part of the office. And I walk in there and they're like, hey, Raj, they're pulling up screenshots. It's like, hey, is this your product? I'm like, yeah, that's my ringtone product. It's like, okay, when do you work on this? I'm like, at night, on the weekends. Like, what device do you work on this? I'm like, I have a different laptop, right? It's at home, like not this machine, whatever. And they're like, well, we believe that this wallpaper feature you've built is competitive to what we're doing, right? So they said, you have a choice. You pretty much don't have a choice. You have to resign or we have to fire you, right? And so like, there I am. So in any ways, I didn't realize at the time, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. I then went and pursued my ringtone company and we grew it like 6x, right? Became like $1 million plus run rate in 2005. It was great, with like a couple engineers in Moscow at the time, which interestingly, yeah. So that's the story there.
Yeah, it's fascinating, but it speaks to your brand as well. And to, I love that. I love that we keep going back to this idea of you're creating things that are problems for yourself, but you also want to know how they can help other people and how you can get them out into the world. Growth strategies, brand strategies, the algorithmic hacks, whatever you want to call them at different times throughout your career.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in what they call concentric marketing. So if I'm a power user, I'm sure I can find 10. If I can find 10, I can find 100. If I can find 100. I mean, again, this is counter to what like best practices might say, like don't build for yourself, but I trust my own sensibility around product. I've made bad decisions and bad taste or whatnot, but in general, I've gotten better over time, better at simulating how do I feel. And so I like to solve for myself and then help solve for other people. And I would say in many ways, I think a lot of people maybe chase revenue. Like that's not been like, or let's say income. That's not never necessarily been my primary motivator. My motivation's always been like happy users. So like if I think back, like, some of the happiest moments, I remember when I was doing that ringtone company, I literally was on an airplane wearing a Tone This t-shirt. And like somebody's like, dude, I use that product. I love it. And I'm like, that's awesome, right? That stuff like is just, it's hard to describe how that feels.
Well, I'm in your camp because I was telling you a little bit about some of the things that I'm doing. We've met on a podcast matching platform, but I was finding that not everybody on the platform who are approaching me as guests were the type of guests that I really wanted. So I created an agentic tool to do deeper research on all of my guests or even pre-qualify them. And I created that for myself, but then other people are like, wait, what did you do? I want to subscribe to that. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm finishing the full build out because then it's like, it has a couple of other things, but I was never intending to make it a product. But it's, and it's a small thing. I don't know how big the market will be for it, but it's also a very highly vetted list of people that I have on there. But it was fun because I was like, this was just me learning how to build agents for myself and like working through. I do think that's the best scenario because you have a real story there as well with the brand. Whether or not the storytelling part was important when you started some of these, it actually,
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great example of where you had a personal pain point and you can now fix it yourself because of Gen AI. So you took agency. And, I think of Gen AI as basically unleashing creative expression. So you're able to build what you need to effectively replace that low leverage work, which was deep research on these different individuals. I think that's amazing. And that's the unlock, right? That's this sort of 10x productivity unlock for everyone out there. is this new acceleration, just new way of work. And so I think it's super exciting. The case I'm most worried about is if you work in the tech sector, you're used to change. Like in many ways, like your job is to disrupt yourself. So things are changing all the time. If you're in engineering, there's different frameworks, there's different coding tools, whatever. You're in design, there's different platforms that you're using for design, whatever, right? But in other sectors, it's not uncommon. You're doing loosely the same workflow for 25 years, right? Like this is the way you took notes, and this is how you continue to take paralegal notes, and this is how you continue to assemble that doc and whatnot. And so it's really difficult to get into a mindset that I may need to disrupt my workflow to bring in AI into that workflow. And I think it's very hard for a lot of people. We take it for granted within the tech sector because it's sort of second nature to the job. And so it's going to take time. But, I think those that are not taking that step, that's where the fear is, because it is an accelerant. And so you do have to get a little bit uncomfortable. And if you don't, there's a real risk that you might get replaced. That's probably trying to say it in the nicest ways. But yeah, that is probably that's what I would be concerned about.
Yeah. I have probably 20 more questions I want to ask you, but I know that we both have a limited amount of time together. So I'll ask you just really quickly, what is a piece of advice that you wish that you'd been given, or it's something you had known when you were starting on your journey?
It's very much related to that topic of focus. I think, there's this quote, I think it's like, strategy is about knowing what you don't do. I think it's very easy to sort of work on something because it's cool, and then work on something else, and then work on something else, and nothing is sort of complete. And never in my career, A ended up at A. You start at point A, you end up at point C. And it almost always took 3 years to see if something's going to work. And so, there's just a certain amount of perseverance. I mean, number one reason startups fail is the founders get tired. The average time to liquidity used to be around 7 years, right? So like these things take time. So it's really important to find a passion space. I like to say space, not particularly idea, because my sort of thesis is just start swimming. So like if you like food, start building a recipe app. You don't know where it's going to go. Like my recipe app didn't start as a recipe app. It started as a food logging app that didn't work. And then we had all this food data. We're like, oh, let's turn it into a recipe app, right? My calendar app didn't start as a calendar app. It started as a sales assistant. You would ask questions like, tell me who I'm going to meet today. Tell me about each person I'm going to meet using voice. And we're like, that wasn't working. Like, oh, let's just turn it into a calendar and give you that data in a push format, right? So I feel like you have to find a space, start swimming. Hopefully that space is aligned with macro trends. So you're swimming downstream as opposed to upstream. And then trust the process, trust your product instinct that it will, you'll edit and figure it out along the way. I call it Jello in motion. Little bits will fall off, and then it'll harden and it'll take shape. So I think so much of it is about focus and perseverance.
Nice. I usually ask for your favorite quote, mantra, verse, poem, family motto after this. I don't know if you have another one you'd like to share with the audience.
These are all in the sort of similar vein. I used to have this poster in my room. It was like repeated 100 times. It'd say try, fail, try, fail, try, fail, try, fail. I'd look at it. Product building, company building, all of it, every step in the journey is actually a bunch of little S-curves. And so you're constantly trying, you're failing, you're trying something else. And eventually you get lucky and something works. So I think it said like try, fail, and then like try, fail, and then try success or something like that, right? And so it's really just a reminder. Something I think about. The other thing I would say is probably the most common question I get is, hey, Raj, I have an idea, but, I'm going to wait till I have my second kid, or after I buy a house, or after I get my third, paycheck or earnout or whatever it is. I mean, who knows, right? Like they planned their whole life, right? And what I often tell people, like, it's never a good time. Like, it's like the time is now. Like, if you have something you want to pursue, do it. Like, you're going to regret it. Things change fast in this universe. What's hot is what's not hot, in 6 months, right? And so, the time is now. Just go for it.
Amazing. And we are leading people to the Solo AI website designer tool.
So of course, the selfish pitch here, if you are building a website, would love for you to check out Solo AI from Mozilla and all the Mozilla products. We do a lot of great stuff for the internet, and Firefox has a new AI mode. It's awesome.
Fantastic. I am likely going to have my students use this as part of our digital media coursework that starts next week. So awesome. I have a new AI tool to share with them. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Great.
And thank you so much for giving your time. I know you're traveling, you're doing so many different things at once. It's really meaningful that you took some time to be here on Your Brand Amplified and share some of your knowledge.
Thank you for the opportunity, Anika. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's watching this episode or listening to it on your favorite platform. I'll be back again with another amazing guest to share their story, their journey, and some tips and tricks to make your life a little bit better very soon. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbrandamplified.com.